Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be giving you guys an update on my banana plants and my tropical bed in general. As you can see, there's nothing to see at the moment because it's all wrapped up. It's still being protected from the winter frosts. But it's now the end of May, it's going to be June in 2 days time. So I need to unwrap these plants to get them ready for the growing season coming ahead. So here in North Scotland, our growing season is very short. The frost can come as late as early June, so I don't normally unwrap my bananas until the end of May or early June, depending on what the weather forecast looks like. So looking at the forecast, we did have it close to freezing last night, but going forward for the next 2 weeks, there shouldn't be any risk of frost, and then after that, we should be fine as well. So I'm going to unwrap them today and see how they're doing. I'm not expecting them to be doing too well, to be honest, because the kind of freeze we had last winter was the kind that really damages them. So what I like to do is I explain how these are insulated and why the winter frost that we had was particularly bad. So what I do is I make these insulation towers. I've got 3 of them here. These are just made out of some PIR insulation. I then mulch around the trunks on the interior as well with some bark, and then I mulch around the outside with bark. So the ground is insulated by about 20 centimeters of bark. Then I've got the trunks insulated with bark and the PIR insulation, and that normally is fine. It survived -6, no problem the previous year. Although I know this year that things are a bit different. And if I look down the back as well, you can see I've got 2 other bananas, one here and one is kind of hiding under there. Didn't have enough insulation towers for them, so I piled this high, about 1 meter high, in just old dead material that I had lying around to insulate these bananas. I know one of them's been fine, which is the hardier one, the Musa Bazoo, but this Musa Sequamensis is not looking so good. So what I'm going to do is remove the majority of this mulch. I've also got some gingers under here, which have hopefully survived. Remove the majority of the mulch, see what's left of these bananas, and I'll also uncover my insulation towers and see how those bananas are doing as well. But when it came to the frost last year, we had the worst kind of frost. We had -11. -11 wouldn't normally be too big a problem, but the issue is it was -11 and it was pretty consistent. So in the day, it was about -4, it stayed well below freezing, and it was about 2 weeks where it didn't go above freezing. So what works well with this kind of insulation is the cold penetrates at night, it starts to freeze up part of the soil, and then in the day it melts, and so the average temperature it averages out is around about freezing or sometimes just above freezing, and then the cold can't really penetrate in. Even if you have -20 at night time, it can only get so far, and then it starts to melt in the day, and so it starts to ease off. But with it constantly below 0, the cold just sunk deeper and deeper through the layers of insulation and probably got quite deep into the soil. So it looks like we're going to have some losses this year, unfortunately. But I already know that some of them survived fine. So the hardy begonias, for example, Begonia grandis here, they're popping up all over the place. They're absolutely fine. They didn't get any frost damage. And then over here we've got the Oxalis triangularis. That has also come up. This isn't hardy, but it had a deep enough mulch that it's come up without any frost damage. So it looks like the ones that were mulched heavily have done fine. Hopefully the bananas are alive at the root. I think I've definitely lost the stems. The only other plants I put in here recently that weren't mulched and covered was the Ansetti banana. That's been kept in the conservatory and put out recently, so it's looking a bit sorry for itself, but that should perk up in the next few weeks. I've also at the back here got this tree dahlia. This tree dahlia was overwintered inside to get a bit of height on it, and this should really take off this year hopefully. And then I've also got another tree dahlia I kept indoors and I put out a few weeks ago. That's sending up a nice new shoot, so they should grow quite tall. Those ones will be interesting to see how they are. I've also got a ginger that I'm going to plant in as well, because I find with my gingers they get so hit back with the frost that when they start to grow in June or July, it takes a long time for them to get going, and by the end of summer they're quite small plants. But if I grow them on in the conservatory, get them growing and put them out a decent size in June, then they flower and do really well for the rest of the summer. So I've got one plant to put outside still, which is one of my gingers, which is a Hedychium wardii. But the other ones, we'll see how they do. Hopefully they've survived the frost, but even if they have, they'll be quite late growing and they might not even flower. So I'll go ahead now and I'll start clearing this out and we'll see what we're left with. So that's all the mulch, all the insulation and all the weeds now removed from the site. You can get a better idea of how bare this site actually is. So what I find quite interesting about my tropical plants here is even in the beginning of June or even sometimes the beginning of July, There's very little to see. You've just got a few plants starting to grow, but by September this whole thing is a huge jungle up to 3 or 4 meters in height. The growth is really phenomenal, and we have such a short growing season. It's surprising how fast and big this actually gets. As I say, the true growth doesn't really start until July, not any quick growth anyway, because the ground is still quite cold here in June, and then the growth really stops around mid to late September when the frosts start to come back. So very short growing season, but we get phenomenal growth, so it'll be quite a contrast at the end of the season when I show you the photos of before and after. But I'll show you the casualties we've had, what was survived, what hasn't. It's kind of hard to tell at this stage. What I'll do is I'll come back at the end of the video in a few weeks time and then we'll know for sure, but I'll just give you a quick view of how the plants look for now. So successes with bananas anyway. The Musa Bazoo, which is the hardiest one and the one that I would think would have the best chance of survival, is this one down here. And as you can see, the main trunk has died. It's rotted off, it's gone all soft, but the main corm underneath is fine, and we've got quite a few new pups starting to shoot. So this is going to be okay. We're probably not going to get to the height we did last summer, which is a shame. This was getting to over 2 meters in height, but we'll just get a real grove of Musa Bazoo plants growing up from here. So not quite the look I was going for, but at least this one's still alive. Now the other bananas, it's hard to tell. This was a Helen's hybrid. The corm seems intact, so it might be okay. There's no signs of growth yet, but this was underneath the insulation, so it was kept colder for longer. So that might be why it's not starting to grow yet. So hopefully there might be something on that. This Musa Commensus is looking quite hopeful. Again, there's no new growth from any of the pups lower down, but we do have a relatively secure stem. There's definitely some rot in there. You can see that one suspended over. Most of the stem is rotten, but considering it's a bit more secure, I think the base of that might be alive. So maybe not this smaller one, but this bigger one, I'm thinking I might actually get some growth on that, which would be great. We get a really tall banana if we do. If not, I think the roots have survived and they'll hopefully resprout from the base. Then round on this side I had a small Dad's Giant, which is a Commensus type of banana, but this was quite a small one, and as you can see the stem's completely gone. I think, to be honest, it's probably the same with the corm, and so there's probably not going to have any growth from this. But we'll just wait and see. Something might grow back, but that one's definitely not looking too hopeful. And then in the middle we had my largest Musa Commensus. Now this one, unfortunately, I didn't have an insulation tower for, but because it was such a big plant I was hoping it might survive. As you can see, it's completely rotted off. The main growth is definitely gone, so we're losing the height. I'll have a little dig around, but I've not noticed any new shoots coming up. So this one is a bit of an unknown at the moment. I'm not sure if this is going to have survived. I'm hopeful it has, because it is quite firm down the bottom there. So I'm thinking maybe in a few weeks we'll see some new shoots coming up. We'll just have to wait and see. So that's all for the bananas anyway. One's definitely alive, the rest looking not too good, but hopefully they'll come back soon. And then the other plants, we have some gingers. The Hedychium wardii down here is definitely resprouting, so that's a great sign. That one was actually one of the less hardy ones last year, but what I did is I gave this an extra deep mulch, and that's come back fine. We have another one down there, which is the Garderianum. That one, I'm not sure if it's going to come back. It's kind of hard to tell, but the corms are hard, so hopefully it'll be okay. And then I also have a Telstar 4, which is this one here. This came back last year from quite hard frost, so I'm hopeful this will be fine, but last year it was very late to resprout. I did notice I have to be careful. There is a bumblebee nest that is just next to this slab, so I'm just having to be a little bit careful at the moment. That's one of the problems with using this much mulch, is it's a great home for bumblebees. It's good for the insects, and I'm glad that they found a home, but I'll just have to be a little bit careful whenever I'm gardening this summer not to disturb this nest, as I definitely don't want to get stung, and I don't want to injure the bumblebees either. So that's the most tropical kind of plants. We've also got a Xanthodecia down here. This is a Hercules variety, a really giant one, and this is just starting to come back. It was quite badly hit by the frost, but you can see sprouting nicely. This should be huge by the end of summer, as long as we don't have a drought. This one's a bit of a bog plant, so I need to keep this very well watered if I want good growth. And then I've also got my Paulownia over there. Now this was a real success story last year. Last year it was this height, but a very thin stem, and it grew up to about 3 or 4 meters in height in one summer, and that was from a very small starting base. But this year what I've done is I've cut it down to encourage extra fast growth. Basically with this tree, when you pollard it, you then get some extra strong growth because it's got a really big root system underground. It's got very small shoots, and so it's got plenty of support for those shoots, and the whole thing will grow incredibly fast. So This I'm expecting great things from. It's very late in shooting, as it always is with Paulownias, but this will probably grow extremely fast, especially come July and August when it's nice and warm, and I'm expecting some really quite rapid growth from this. I think that'll be the fastest growing and most interesting one this summer, that's for sure. Now unfortunately, I have my Trachycarpus just down here. This is a Trachycarpus fortunei. Should be very hardy, but unfortunately, although it looks fine, the leaves are quite healthy, the middle spears in the center, they actually rotted off and they fell out, so it looks like the growing point has died, and once that happens there's really no chance for this. So I'll leave it, as long as it's green I'll just give it a chance, just in case it decides to send up some new shoots. But normally with palms, once the growing point goes, that's the whole thing dead. So unfortunately the Trachycarpus palm has died. All my seedlings as well, they were also killed. Basically, with the cold spell we had, as well as it being a prolonged cold spell that was quite hard frosts, there wasn't any snow. So normally when we get the really cold weather, we tend to have snow, and that means that the ground's insulated. We didn't have that insulation last winter, and also the cold spell kind of came out of nowhere. Normally when we have the really cold weather, it's January, February time, and we've had a few months of colder weather and frost for the plants to get acclimatized and get used to the cold weather. But we had a really unusual autumn. We really had no frost until November, and then we had the first frost that came was about -4, so that was a bit of a shock. Normally we get a few light frosts, such as 0 or 1 or -1, and then just about a week after that -4 we had -11, and we went into that deep freeze. So it's quite a shock for the plants. So although this would probably survive -15 normally, but because it was such a sudden transition from almost summer-like weather to winter weather, it was just probably too much for it. So unfortunately the Trachycarpus is probably a goner. So as I say, with the rest of the plants, we'll see how it does. I'll see you guys in a few weeks time. I'm not sure how long it will take for these to start responding and growing. We'll see what survived. Hopefully by then we'll see quite a difference. You won't see much difference with a lot of these plants because the ground is still cold, but certainly with the Unsetti over there, that should have some big leaves by the next update. And the Paulownia, I'm hoping will be at least a meter tall. We'll see, that will really start growing quickly once it gets going. So it's exactly 1 month later, and as you can see there's quite a bit of difference in the bed already. So the ground was quite cold when I last saw you in this video, but we've had probably one of the warmest Junes on record, and so we've had some really surprisingly warm temperatures. Normally in June we normally only have 16-17 degrees most days, but this June we had temperatures up into 25-28 degrees Celsius, so exceptional heat, and that's really helped with the plants. Now the night temperatures were still a bit cool, surprising considering how warm the day temperatures were, but there's definitely been a big change in the bed, as you can see. So I'll start with the Paulownia. You can see that has shot up. I think that's now over a meter of growth, and we've got some absolutely massive leaves on there. I can use my hand for scale, but I'm 6'5", so I'm not the best for scale, but it is some phenomenally large leaves, probably about the size of a dustbin lid already, and these leaves are only going to get bigger, so it's looking really good for the Paulownia this year. Definitely looks like we'll break the previous record. Now other plants, definitely lost some bananas, but luckily 3 of them have survived. So we've got 2 succumensis that have survived. This one here, which has sent up 2 sprouts. This one over here, which has also sent up 2. And then we've also got the Musa Bijou at the back. So this one you can see is put all the shoots up on this side, so maybe this side was more insulated. No other shoots appearing yet. This Musa succumensis does actually have about 4 shoots coming up. There's one over here, one over there, which you can't really see. So this will be a little clump of Musa succumensis soon. And then the Musa Bijou has just gone crazy. This is the hardiest of them all, so it's not surprising. But this has got loads of shoots, probably about 20 coming up. So that's going to be a real grove. Not as tall as last year, because the energy is going to be distributed throughout them all, and they're all fighting for space. But it's going to be a nice, interesting little grove of bananas there. And then the Hedychiums, they've all survived as well. So we've got this one at the back, that's Telstar 4. 3 shoots coming up from that. At the back there, I've also got a transplanted Hedychium that I had in the garden, which, as you can see from there, is actually already got some flower buds for me at the back of that one. So it's going to flower soon. There's also flower buds appearing on this one as well. So that's one of the advantages of me having this grown inside in the conservatory and then planting it out, is I get flowers in July. That's the Hedychium. The Hedychium that was in the ground is this one down here. This is doing okay. It's got 4 shoots in total coming up. And then we've also got the Gardnerianum, that's this one here, which has got 1 shoot coming up as well. So all the Hedychiums have survived, so that's great to see. All the Begonia grandis have also survived. I think they were probably coming up in the last section of the video. But these ones, which were a bit more insulated, have done really well. One or two though are not growing as well as I would have expected, so these have maybe had a bit of frost damage to the roots. You can see there's not very big clumps, and even this one at the back here is really really struggling down there. And if you're wondering what this plastic is, it's actually a bumblebee nest. I've had to cover that up to make it so it's protected. The birds were starting to scratch at it and eat the bumblebees, so I've covered it up. I'll show you some photos of how they looked as well. So the bumblebees are going to be living in the middle of my tropical jungle here. Other plants which have popped up since the last update, we have over here the Oxalis triangularis. This is looking absolutely fantastic at the moment, really shooting up. Hopefully it doesn't have the fungal issues it had last year, but it's looking really good so far. We've also got some Hedychium which have survived, which I'm not surprised. This is fully hardy, and this will spread. I know it's quite invasive, but I've got it in my bed and I'm just going to keep it contained. It can spread throughout your whole garden if you're not careful. That's going to make a nice ground cover. I've also got some nice alstroemeria. It's really clumping up nicely over here. No flowers yet, but once it starts flowering, that'll flower the whole summer long, right into like October, November, whenever the first frosts are, so that's going to look really good. I'm glad that survived. Over here we've got the calla lily, and this calla lily is the Hercules variety. This will grow absolutely shoot by the end of summer. A little bit of damage, you can see the leaves are looking a little bit yellow, but it's starting to grow strongly now, and that should be shoots by the end of summer. One nice surprise is one of my canna lilies. So that's a calla lily, and this is a canna lily, very similar in the names, but this one has survived and it's coming up quite nicely. So what I did a few years ago is I planted about 15 different varieties, see which would do best in my climate. None of them did very well, and most of them died over the winter. I think 3 survived the winter before, and this year just this one has survived the winter. So this variety I like. I don't know, I need to dig underground. I did bury the labels with them so I can find out what varieties they are. But I think at the end of this year I might dig that up, separate it as it's getting quite a nice clump now, and maybe dot it around in a few other places in this tropical bed. And the biggest surprise for me was my Trachycarpus, which has not died and has actually started to grow some new shoots. So I'll look down here, you can actually see there's a new leaf coming out. So you can see there, it might be hard to show on the camera, but there's actually a little bit of green starting to push through there. We've got some new leaves starting to come up. So this has survived, that's fantastic. And in fact, it has even started to thicken up the stem a bit more. So that's definitely alive and doing well. So I'm really happy that my Trachycarpus fortunei has survived. And that is a hardy palm, and it should survive -15 anyway, so I'm glad it didn't get killed off in that hard frost, even though it was quite a severe frost for it. So a little bit of a disappointment was the Unsetti ventricosum. It's been really slow to get going. The reason being, it was too big for me to put in a pot and then take outside. Normally I get the roots going in March, so when I plant it out in June, it's got a reasonable root system. This had no roots when it went outside, so it's been growing the roots the last month. The roots have just established, and that's why I was just starting to get some reasonable leaves starting to come out now. So hopefully that will take off soon, but it looks like even though it's got a much bigger trunk than it did last year, the eventual size at the end of summer might not be that great. We'll just have to see how that does. And then we've got a few other plants over here. So over here we've also got 2 tree dahlias. We've got this one here which I grew inside. Hasn't grown much since I put it outside. It's just kind of leafed up, hasn't put on much height, but it's doing okay. But I did have one that I grew from a tuber, and that's just straight away from the ground. It hasn't been grown inside, and that's really starting to take off. So I think this one will actually overtake the other one, even though at the moment it's half the height. I know from experience these grow really fast, so this will probably be about 2 or 3 meters by the end of summer. And then I've also got a courgette as well, as I did have a little bit of space and I just wanted to add a courgette just so I can have some vegetables and a slight tropical appearance. So that's all for this video update. As you can see, the tropical bed is starting to come along. It's definitely a bit behind where it was last year. I'll show you some photos of what it should look like, and it is a little bit behind. And the only other addition I've done since the last video is this Brugmansia here. So this Brugmansia was just struggling a bit for me inside. I think it didn't like the small pot it was in, so I've put it out here in the bed, see how it does. I'll definitely have to dig this up though at the end of the summer, because this certainly isn't hardy and won't survive. It's just an addition just to replace one of the bananas for this summer, and maybe next summer I'll get a different banana in. So that's all for this update. Quite happy that although we did lose 2 banana plants and got quite a lot of damage to my other plants, most things have survived and are looking good now. And I'll show you an update at the end of the summer, and by then it should hopefully be really thick and jungle-like. It won't get to the same height as it did last year, I don't think, so I'm maybe thinking 1.5 meters, 2 meters max. Last year it got up to 2 or 3 meters, but the Paulownia, that will certainly grow large, and I'm thinking the Paulownia will probably be almost the height of my house. Last year it reached 4 meters, I'm thinking this year it could be 6, 7 or 8 meters in height.